Are we all there? Where did Karla go? Oh, there you are. Okay. I'm going to make you the host. I didn't log in through the back end because so that's why. All right. So
okay, here we go.
There you go.
And don't worry about all these slides. Like I said, this is the CE class. So I'm just kind of, gonna pop on through it. Okay. So the first kind of, thing I like to say is, do not mistake your due diligence for legal representation. I do know what the overall policy of the office is that the office doesn't really like you guys drafting your own purchase and sale agreements. And I also understand that some sellers refuse to hire an attorney. But be careful because, when you start, especially if it's anything past, I put in a name, a date, an amount, sort of thing. The minute that there start being contingencies in there that you're having to add in the special provisions and stuff like that, I can promise you that wording, it matters. And it really matters. And I always tell people that, if you've ever worked with me, I'm a little bit more on the conservative side. And if it's happened to me once, it can happen to me again, because what are those bold rules, sort of thing. And so people are like, why are you so crazy about this? And I'm like, you know what? You've been around long enough. You've done enough of these, and people have tried to sue on them enough, or people have tried to either get their deposit back or not return a deposit, or, something like that enough, that if I'm truly here trying to do my due diligence as an attorney, I'm going to try to get as much protection and make it as clear and iron tight as we can for the side that I'm trying to protect. And so I feel like there's a certain amount of real estate agents out there that are like, it's just a P&S agreement, just get it done. And I always say, you've clearly never been sued on a purchase and sale agreement, because once you have been, it will be a much bigger deal to you, or you've lost a deposit because of a purchase and sale agreement, or, something like that. So I'm not saying I'm the best, the brightest, or anything else like that, but I really do care about the purchase and sale agreement. And I do take it very seriously. Okay. In order to attempt, avoid confusion, trust, potential litigation, and loss of time, it's best to verify any available data when possible. So this is going back to like the whole, how many bedrooms are there? How many this, how many that? And again, I have people call me on the regular that say, hey, so the building department states it's only a 3-family, but my seller says it's a 4-family. What should I list it as? It's a slippery slope, guys, because here's the thing. If people walk in, looks like a 4-bedroom, it's going to sell like a 4-bedroom. It's going to attract more people if it's a 4-bedroom. Then you could potentially, your seller might say, you're doing me a disservice by not selling it and marketing it as a 4-family or a 4-bedroom. At the same time, two things. If the appraiser comes in and has picked up the field card and is like, I can only appraise this as a 3-bedroom, not a 4, that's going to cause a problem with the appraised value. And then additionally, if the seller or the buyer did not do due diligence, and specifically when it comes to like a septic system, could potentially come back and sue the listing agent and say, you misrepresented this property. Now, is Massachusetts a buyer beware due diligence state? Absolutely. But have plaintiffs prevailed on that? Would it still make you have to pay into your errors and omissions insurance to defend the claim to say it's not my fault? Yes. So I prefer to say that it's a, 7-room, 3-bedroom with a bonus, something, because again, I don't want to get sued. But that's a conversation to have with your sellers. It's a conversation to have either with your coach, your mentor, or, the powers that be at your office to determine what's the correct strategy. Again, you're always from me going to get what's the most legally prudent way to move forward. And I understand that, what the rule is and how we do it on the streets are often very different. And I appreciate that. And I understand that. And I acknowledge that. Okay.
Karla,
yes.
I have a quick question about that. So I had a similar situation recently when I was looking at a property, and it had a full bathroom in the basement. And I know below grade and it's a finished basement doesn't really count. And I was looking at other listings that were similar and they included that full bathroom in the number of baths. So you're saying that if the public record says 3 beds, 1 bath, but the bathrooms in the basement is full, don't include it. And I had talked to an appraiser about it. I said, so what do you think? And the appraiser was like, well, if you want to use it for marketing purposes, you can, to make more people come in, that like they will be lured in, but you're saying don't do that. Just put it as what public.
Bathrooms, it's a little bit different. So it's actually, there's no rule that you cannot have underground living space count as living space. It depends on the town and everything else like that. I sold a 2-family back in the day in Revere. The entire basement was the second family, like a 100%. And I went to town hall and I got the certificate that says 2-family and everything. And I put it in my slicker at the open house and I put it online. When people are like, this is a 2-family, really? Is it legal? I'm like, it is. Someone probably paid someone some quick money, because the second form of egress was actually, you had to go upstairs through the kitchen out the first floor. So there was no ingress or egress, but there's no hard and fast rule that says below grade is not allowed. It depends on the town. It depends on the permitting process and everything else like that. I feel like bathrooms are a little bit different because I feel like bathrooms are different than bedrooms. And I'm trying to articulate why I feel that way, because a bathroom, it's not like you can look in a room and be like, is that a bedroom or is it an office? It also, especially with septic systems and everything else like that, a bathroom, you say it's 2 bathrooms and then you go downstairs and you're like, well, there's a bathroom. Like, it's a bathroom. You can't get around it. And on that, the question becomes, is the buyer doing their due diligence to say, okay, there's this random bathroom in the basement. Was it ever permitted? Was anything ever done with it? And I think that we're going to see the fallout from this post-COVID huge, because people are like finishing attics and like sunrooms and, in the basement spaces and everything, because people are learning from home and working from. I think that this is eventually going to become a bigger deal. And I think from the standpoint of, if you're, and this, it is kind of like a pet peeve of mine, because I guess it's just because it takes more work on the agent side to figure out, because if you're trying to like comp out a property and everything is saying 2,500, 2,500, 2,500, and your capes, or like small colonials, like 18, and you're like, where are all, but then what it'll say is gross living space is, 2,500. And then there's a note that says includes 800 of finished basement space. Well, you're now trying to not compare, you're not really comparing apples to apples. Yeah. So I wish that there was kind of a rule in MLS that it's like, unless it's been permitted and approved and on the field card, it states that that this is the square footage, you can't include it in MLS. You have to say, there has to be like a separate thing for like finished basement space. But it all really depends, is like, is the appraiser going to allow that finished basement space to be part of the living space? That's really what it comes down to for bedrooms, living rooms, anything else like that. If they're not, then it's going to skew your appraisal. So again, it comes down to, it's maybe not what your seller wants to hear. And if everyone's waiving the appraisals and waiving mortgage contingencies, then have at it. Like, absolutely have at it. And that's why I'm saying in this market, some of the things that I'm saying may not apply as much, because we've got 25 buyers for every house. So sellers get to pick to do whatever the heck they want, and no one's policing this.
Right. Okay.
So.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
And the last year that the registries, the town halls have been closed, so you couldn't even go in there to ask them anything.
Right. Yeah. So if they're not online and no one's in the office to call up, then you're kind of flying blind, and it is what it is.
Right.
Okay. So back to like the unethical practice of law. So I sat through this class one time, and I thought that, Article 13 was always an interesting article, in the sense that realtors should not engage in activities that constitute the unauthorized practice of law, and shall recommend that legal counsel be obtained when the interest of any party to the transaction requires it. So the question really for me always becomes, is when would it not require is, I guess, a word that I think of as more as like, is going to be in the best interest of. And I always tell people, it's like, it's fine if the buyers and the sellers don't want to use attorneys, but the minute one side has an attorney, it's truly a disadvantage, I believe, for the other side not to have an attorney. And that's my spiel on that. We'll leave it go. Okay, so we're not going to care about that. Okay, here's a great case that you don't have to remember, but here it is. So when would you be liable and when would you not be liable as an agent to properly disclose something? So the Quinlan v. Clasby case basically says the broker was told the property was a 3-family and therefore marketed as such, even though it was only zoned as a 2-family. Broker inspected the property, found the separate apartments, no reason to suspect the zoning was incorrect, didn't review the records. The court found that since the broker did not knowingly misrepresent, in this case, they could rely on that information and broker was not responsible, could not be found liable. Second case, DeWolf v. Hingham, Center. Seller was not 100% sure what the classification was. Ding, 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 there's the problem. Seller didn't know, agent didn't do any sort of due diligence, agent got sued and lost because they incorrectly marketed the property. It says, given the lack of certainty in the zoning, the facts that the representation was put in writing incorrectly and the broker did not fulfill any due diligence to exercise reasonable care, that's why they were at fault. And this is why I'm saying, was it the buyer's due diligence to do, or like the buyer's responsibility to do due diligence? We are a buyer beware state. Yes, we are. But the minute that you have a reason to think that something might be wrong and you don't do your due diligence and then you misrepresent, that's where the problem becomes. So perfect example on this, condos, it happens all the time. People assume that it's because of a condo, water and sewer is included in the condo fee. That is 100% a false statement. If you're in a big complex, probably. If you're in a big building, probably. The minute you're newer construction, townhouse, like something like that, row house or something like that, you very well may have your own water meter. So don't just check it off just because. If you don't know and the seller doesn't know, or you don't know and it hasn't been verified, the answer is you don't know. So less information is better than more information that may be incorrect. Same with parking spaces. We've had a case about how many parking spaces actually came and what was held out in MLS and was it conveyed correctly. We've had a case on that. I mean, these sorts of things come up. We've had cases about someone thought it was on town water and sewer and it wasn't, and it was septic, and the buyer came back later. Now, granted, this was an interesting situation. Seller had lived in the house forever and ever and ever. Her husband had died. Like, they'd lived there forever, and kids moved her up to New Hampshire. This was a little bit before COVID. Seller told me it's on town water and sewer. I said, great. Seller told the listing agent, on town water and sewer. Great. I represent the seller. You know, I was like, okay, here's the final water bill. Here's the, like everything else like that. Sent it over, didn't think twice of it. After closing 3 months later, town comes and goes, you're on private septic, and at closing, you had to the seller had to tie into the system, and it's going to cost you $15,000. Buyers came back and sued listing agent and seller for false representation, and the agent was like, well, why wouldn't I take her word for granted? And I said, you're absolutely right. This is like an anomaly. Why wouldn't you? Especially when it was in a city, not Boston, but it was in a city. So you're like, why wouldn't it be? Don't take anything for granted. Do not take anything for granted. Even if your client tells you, sometimes I feel like go vet that information. And that agent had to end up paying $10,000 because she was found at fault, that she didn't do her due diligence. So, well, we're not going to talk about that. Okay, so we're verifying ownership. I will tell you how many times I am surprised, even by an agent in this office who swore up and down and up and down and up and down that the spouse did not own the property. And I was like, well, here's the deed that says they do. And they had forgotten that they had put the spouse on sometime after closing. So if you don't know how to find a deed at the Registry of Deeds, I'm more than willing to show you how. If you can't find it, which happens sometimes, especially if it was new construction or if it's a very old deed or maybe they changed the address of it or something. If you can't find it, you're going to go on a listing appointment or something, shoot me an email, give me a call, send me a text. I'll find it for you. I'll let you know who the ownership is. So if there's two people on the deed and they're both alive, those two people both need to be signing really the listing agreement, the purchase and sale agreement. They're going to have to sign the deed and everything else like that. If someone has passed away, okay, well then one person's still alive, we're going to need a death certificate. Are we putting in the works to find that death certificate? If the only person on the deed or both the people on the deed have passed away. Is there a personal representative? Has that personal representative actually been appointed by the court, or is it the family's been like, oh, Jane's going to handle it, you know, sort of thing. And if someone's been appointed by the court, was there a will? Wasn't there a will? Are we going to need a license to sell? Because if we're going to need a license to sell, we need to set appropriately the expectations in the MLS listing that closing's not happening in 30 days. It's probably not happening in 60 days, and it may not even happen in 90 days. And if they have to probate the entire estate because there was no will and there's no personal representative, we shouldn't even be listing the house right now. Kristen's like, yeah, man, yeah, don't get me started. Okay, so the other thing—
Probate takes forever, especially at COVID.
And like, don't even talk to me about like Suffolk or Middlesex. Like, good luck. See you next year. Like, Plymouth and Norfolk's a little bit better, but yeah, it takes a long time, especially then you have COVID. So another thing to look for are life estates. So let's say, you know, my husband's name's Todd. So let's say that my parents deeded us their house and said, you know, this house, you know, Larry and Sue Heine grant to Karla and Todd Goodale the rights of all of our blah, 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 and we reserve a life estate. Well, guess what? My parents need to be signing the listing agreement. They need to be signing the purchase and sale agreement, and they need to be signing the deed because they have an ownership right. It's almost like you have like a timeshare or something. Like, you have a right to this, and no one can sell without them releasing their rights. Same with, you know, like if you're selling and there's rights of way, like water rights, or, you know, rights of way to, you know, it could be a bunch of different things. Looking at the deed and just giving it, some deeds are like, most deeds I'd say nowadays are very vague. It just says, you know, and, you know, conveys with all rights and restrictions that are still in full force and effect. And you're like, well, then you have to go do the title search to find what rights and restrictions may still be in full force and effect. But if we know about something already, like sometimes people know that they have a driveway easement, or sometimes it'll say right on the deed, there's a driveway easement. But listen, if there's a driveway easement, it says it on the deed, you should put that in the listing in MLS, because there are buyers who do not want a driveway easement. It will kill the deal. And so you've gone through all this, you've had your open houses, you've vetted all these buyers and everything. Now you finally get the offer accepted, and somewhere 10 days later, they find out there's a driveway easement, and one of them's like, I'm not sharing my driveway with anyone. Well, now all your hard work is for naught. I need to keep an eye on time. Okay. The other thing that you, and again, you guys are not supposed to be professionals in this, but if you ever need, like, you just want to say, hey, can you give a quick, what we do is we do a current owner rundown. We don't do the deep dive in, because the current owner rundown is usually what's going to keep a seller from selling. It's usually not a further back issue. And, you know, we'll do it at the registry of deeds. Now, if there's something in the family and probate court, if there's something in the bankruptcy court or anything else like that, that's a much deeper dive that we're going to need to really kind of get the full title report back. But we can definitely, you know, look at things. Here's a thing. It says on here, hybrid properties, recorded and registered properties. I'm not nearly as concerned for you guys about that. What I am concerned about is when a property is attached to two towns. Because let's say it's on Rockland and Abington are next to each other, or, you know, Quincy and Braintree, or any of those. Like, we now need 2 municipal lien certificates. If it were in Braintree and, what's it? I'm trying to think of 2 towns that touch where one's Norfolk County and one's Plymouth County. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I know it's happened to me before. We're all of a sudden, that property specifically that I'm talking about, it was not only recorded, but it was registered land, and it was in 2 towns. The buyer's recording fees were 4-fold. So the recorded deed is 155 or 165 or 175, depending on which county you're in. They had to pay that 4 times for every single document, because they had to do on the recorded side, the registered side, and in 2 different counties. So that's something that, you know, the buyer needs to know. I mean, average closing or recording fees right now are around the 500 mark. So times 4, that could, you know, for a first-time home buyer, like, just blow their budget completely. Okay, so field card reviewed and the accuracy of the field card. There's another. Okay, I'm going to say this. The assessor's department assesses what they see. If they see a 16-bedroom house that's a cape, they're going to say, hey, it's a 16-bedroom. Like, they're going to assess what they see. They will potentially tax a basement and, you know, those sorts of things if it looks like living space. The building department is what you really need to go by. And this is where people get caught up, because if the assessor sees 4 bedrooms, they're going to assess it as a 4-bedroom. The assessor's department also doesn't, the assessor's department is not necessarily the best place to get like who the owner is, because if you have like gotten divorced and recorded a new deed or put it into a trust or something like that, the new owners only, the town only gets notification when the property is conveyed for consideration. So if you're conveying it for $1 or $100 or something like that, it's considered nominal consideration. It doesn't change the ownership. So you might say, well, public records said Bob and Mary own the house. And I'm like, well, no, but Mary and Bob got divorced and Mary has the house and Bob's no longer involved in it, you know, sort of thing. But that's the big thing about the assessors and the building department. The building department is going to say, how many rooms has this house been approved for? How many bathrooms has it been approved for? How many bedrooms is it approved for? So I tell people the assessor's card is nice. The building department card is really where you want to be. And that's really what you want to be looking at. And again, you know, we kind of already touched on like, you know, permits, were the permits pulled? Have the permits been closed? You know, that's a big one, is that, you know, we have a bunch of outstanding permits, and where the outstanding permits can end up becoming a problem is that my husband's an electrician and he doesn't want to put his name on someone else's permit because, first of all, his insurance comes into play. So if he signs off on a permit and someone else did the work and there's a fire, because of an electrical fire, they can sue him and his insurance. And he's like, I had nothing to do with it. I just signed off on it. So what happens is when, you know, the builder, the plumber, the electrician, or the whomever else is like long gone and we can't find them, and now you got to try to close permits. One, I mean, you might be able to, it's called like, you know, kind of like lending your permit. It's called lending your permit. Then you'll be like, oh yeah, give me some money and I'll just sign off on it. No big deal. You might be able to find someone to do that. If not, they're going to want to go in and like really vet the work, maybe take some things out, do it the way that they want it, you know, like, or the building inspector or electrical inspector or plumbing inspector may require certain things to be done. So this is another thing that it's like, you know, in these markets that we have, where I'm getting in an offer in today and we're supposed to be closing on the 31st, that's 21 days. And we just did an electrical and plumbing repair rider. And I said, I wanted the work done 7 days before closing. And they were like, we've already started to make calls. We don't even think we can get this work done before closing, because they're 3 weeks and everybody's, you know, maxed out with time and jobs and everything else like that. So again, these are, and I understand listing agents. There's also one house for every 50 agents out there. So I understand trying to put hurdles in between you and getting the listing is not what you want to be doing. But once you have the listing, you know, you need to do a pro-con of, do I do some additional due diligence, or do I just hope that it doesn't come up? And if it doesn't come up, which it very well may not in this market, then no harm, no foul. Because nothing like trying to have your clients go through hoops and spend money and everything if no one's asking them to. And I get that. Okay. My personal opinion about sellers' disclosures is they are a great way for a seller to get sued by the buyer. Because the problem is that when you're getting something, you're like super scrutiny, like, what am I getting? Oh, is the washer and the dryer and the da-da-da-da-da. When you're giving away something, you kind of couldn't care less. So they're taking the seller's disclosure and like, I don't think so. I don't know. No. Here you go. And then when something happens, it says, no, we've never had water. No, we've never had any fires. No, we haven't. And then all of a sudden seller does, or buyer does something after they bought the house. And they're like, well, your seller's disclosure said you had never had a fire. You had a kitchen fire that you never told us about. You lied. You fraudulently misrepresented the information. And the sellers might be like, oh my God, I completely forgot about that. It was just some popcorn, you know, no big deal. Well, you've now got something. So I prefer, what I used to do is I would be like, I would maybe ask the questions on the form. And if they hesitated at all, or I would have my own questions that I'd be like, okay, what are the things that people are actually going to want to know? If you know specifically and you can show, we got our roof in 2002, here it is. But if you're like, I think 2002, I'm like, okay, well, maybe what we should say is roof is less than 20 years old, or, you know, something like that. So again, I would say, especially in this market, less information that is verified and vetted is better than more information that's potentially wrong. So I like for the sellers to actually write down what they know. They know about their house, and everything else. If the buyer brings me a question, I will say, what do you think? And then I can write back in an email. It says seller's not 100% sure. They think this, but they're not willing to like stand behind that statement. Again, we don't want anyone to get sued, because guess what happens? It all trickles downhill. The minute your buyer or seller gets sued in any way, then it's like, okay, we want to sue the agent, then we want to sue the attorney, then we want to sue everyone else like in the path, because I believe that specifically buyers really believe that agents are supposed to have completely done everything and found out about the house. And what I used to tell my buyers is I was like, your life, your money, your future. And so if you want me to be on a call or go with you to town hall, I'd be more than happy to, but I'm not going to do it for you, because if you send me for one piece of information and I get that one piece of information, but you had been there and would have asked 3 follow-up questions that could potentially give you information that I wouldn't have known was important to you, because it's not my house and I'm not going to live in that neighborhood, then you could potentially say, well, why didn't you get this information? And I'm like, well, you didn't ask for it. So I was always saying, I will either have you do it, I will give you directions on how to do it, or I'll do it with you, but I will not do it for you. Same about vetting schools, same about like anything else like that. You're going to have your kids in the school. So what's important to you? Is it sports? Is it music? Is it like having art? Is it just math and science? Like, what's important to you? We can say they're great schools, but great schools that don't have the hockey program that you really want your kid to eventually play hockey professionally is not going to be a great school for you. Lead paint, we know about it. We still know about it. Okay. I will tell you my personal opinion, and any of the heavy listing agents in here that want to speak up. Okay. This is how I used to do when I was a listing agent. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to hear all the conjecture going on. So what I would do is I would meet the buyer and the home inspector at the house as a listing agent. I would let them in. I would sit in my car. Now, granted, this was if you have the luxury of having the time to do that. That way, if the heat doesn't turn on or they can't find something, I'm there to help. I'll be right in, I'll help you out. But I'm not listening to everything, because remember, once you know, you're supposed to disclose. Now, granted, there's a big difference between the conjecture of like, oh, I don't know, that could be a little rusted, versus like, look at the rust, it's right here. So I didn't like to I didn't even really want to sit in the kitchen. I mean, there were sometimes it was really cold out and I might do it, but like, I didn't want to listen. I wanted to be there as a resource if it was needed. Additionally, I never, as a listing agent, wanted the home inspection report, because the minute I had that, again, I know if this deal falls apart, I'm supposed to go disclose. You better believe everything in that report, my seller is going to be ripped, you know what, that I'm all of a sudden like, no, we have to disclose all of this. I have had people send me entire reports before, and I immediately, as soon as I see it, I respond back and I said, I was not requesting the report. I have deleted all records of this. Please only send me the pertinent portions, so that I have a written recital of like, I didn't look at this. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. I don't want to know about it. The listing agent and the seller are not entitled to that report. The buyer paid for it. It is the buyer's work product, 100%. If they want repairs, you can absolutely say, please show me the pertinent portions of the report that support that you need XYZ, and they should be able to send that over. But tell them, I'm not asking for the whole report. I mean, if you're going to be listing a condo and you think that it's at a price point, or there are potential buyers out there that are, going to be FHA submitting offers, and you think that you're willing to accept an FHA offer, again, in this environment, then you might want to try to find out ahead of time, either call, one of our preferred lenders or your preferred lender, or call the management company and say, is this property already FHA approved? Because again, that's something that can either kill a deal or definitely hold up a deal if, we're trying to race to the closing table and all of a sudden the lender has to get the project FHA approved. You don't need to know this. Okay. If you're going to list a multifamily and it's coming with tenants, I will tell you right now, I expect, and I will not sign a purchase and sale agreement with my buyer, at least, until I have leases or until I've been told in writing that there's tenancy at wills. I want to know what deposits, if they're last month or security, and what amount those are, what the rent is right now. I want all of that. And in my purchase and sale agreement, I incorporate all of that information so the seller is signing to it. And then additionally, a requirement when I'm representing the buyers is that there's something called a tenant estoppel certificate. So we basically give it to the tenant and we say, what's your name, what unit, what's the address, how many people reside here, how many are under the age of 6, do you have security deposit? If so, how much? Do you have a copy of that? Same with last month's rent. How much do you pay for rent? Do you own any of the appliances? Are you behind in any rent? Are there any like suits between you and the landlord? Blah, 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 blah. There's all these questions that the tenant has to say. The tenant signs it, and then we give it to the seller, and the seller has to say, yes, I agree with this. So that tenant estoppel does not have to be delivered before the signing of the purchase and sale agreement, but I make it a condition that the buyer does not have to close. Why? I have been burned more than once with people telling me there's no security deposits, we're not holding last month's rent, or we own this, or anything else like that. All of a sudden, seller's gone, buyer walks in and is like, hi, nice to meet you, and they're like, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we've agreed to. And they're ready to move out. And they're like, I want my $2,000 security deposit and you're holding last month's rent. And the new buyer's like, no, I'm not. So 100% for me, non-negotiable. Non-negotiable, we will not move forward. It is a requirement of closing because I need to protect my buyer. And if not, the buyer's going to be looking at me going, do you want to give me $4,000 times 2, sort of thing. So I think it is it's good course. And if a listing agent wants that form ahead of time to be able to have the tenant fill it out when you're listing and that you can put it up into MLS or anything else like that, more than happy to send it to you. I have it in a PDF.
That's amazing, Karla.
I do what I can.
That's huge.
I do what I can.
Yeah, because lately I've talked to 2 people. I'm one of them that's looking at a property that the owners will not get rid of the tenants. They don't want to deal with it.
During COVID, and that's another thing about listings, guys. Like, fine, if your landlord is like, I'm not getting rid of my tenants, I'm not serving notices to quit, I'm doing nothing. You need to put in there, like, just put it in the disclosure. Property will not be delivered vacant. But remember when you do that, because I had quite a few during COVID that this has been a problem. Well, buyer wants to owner occupy. They're getting an owner occupied loan. You sign when you sign your disclosures, and then again at closing, it says you will owner occupy within 60 days. Well, when the bank finds out that there's actually, first of all, if there's leases, forget about it, because if the lease is until August and you're closing in April or May, they're not going to be out. You can't physically. And the bank doesn't want to hear that it's your intention to serve notices to quit and your intention is to evict them, because although the owner occupied status is an intent, and things can change. There can be change of circumstances. I've had people who have like been buying a house because they're moving here and then they're not moving. They didn't get relocated, or people who are buying and then they're being deployed immediately and they're not going to own, like, things can happen. But if the bank sees it that there's no way you're going to owner occupy within 60 days, it becomes a problem. And then they can't get their loan. The same is when you guys are writing offers, which I've seen it, I can't even tell you how many times, that the offer will state buyers will give, sellers a 90 or up to a 6-month, use and occupancy, because they're trying to make their offer more attractive. But then I see that and I'm like, I can't write that in, because if you're already saying you will not own or occupy within 60 days, you're committing loan fraud. Like, we can't have that. We can say that we'll do it for 60 days. And what happens after that 60 days that I know nothing about and your lender knows nothing about, again, I know I'm being recorded. We're not trying to commit loan fraud here, but it's like your intention needs to be. So buying something that you want to own or occupy with 2 tenants in it, and there's no intention of anyone getting them out, and the lease isn't going to end within the next 60 days, that's a problem. That is a big problem. And it's something that I'm seeing more and more of, because people know. I mean, I have something that's supposed to be closing on the 26th. Her rate lock ends the 31st. Tenants aren't out. Tenants have never let them go in for an appraisal. We've had this property under agreement since December. They're not out. They've served notices to quit. They're still waiting for the courts to assign a date in order for the eviction, but the courts are so far backlogged on all of this. And she keeps going, well, the seller needs to pay my rate lock extension. I'm like, the seller's going to do nothing of the sort. They told you from the beginning that they wanted you to take it with the tenants, and you didn't want to. And I was like, so you're either going to pay your own rate lock extension, and hopefully in 30 days they're going to be out, or you're going to walk away from this property, because that's how this game's being played. And the landlord never wanted to evict, but said that they would give notices to quit. And so I don't know what you want me to do. And it's owner occupied. So again, problems. Okay. We already kind of talked about that. Yeah, so I say a lot of times, if it looks or smells funny, it's probably funny. You need to use your gut on this. And I do have I have a personal story on this. So, you know, if you see freshly, specifically ceilings maybe, where there could have been some water damage, or, you know, if anything's not looking right and you ask some questions. So my story about this is, I had really good friends that lived up in Peabody, and I want to say, God, I think it's like now, it was like 2005 maybe. There was a huge storm over Mother's Day. We called it the Mother's Day storm. And like Route 1 was underwater in like Danvers and Saugus and Peabody, like underwater. So I went up to my friend's house, and their entire street, because there was like a brook at the end of a dead end street, they were having like pumping parties. The entire street, everybody was underwater, like 100%. And it's a funny street because everybody has radon on that town. So every town has their little like white radon and everything. And so, you know, we're all out, you know, having a couple cocktails, like pumping, you know, doing the thing. And so a couple of years later, my friends were like, oh, our friends are selling. They want to interview you. And so like I went and I was like, great, blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, like jokingly was like, ever had water? Knowing. And they were like, no. And I was like, no? They're like, no. I was like, Mother's Day storm? And they were like, nope. Do I list the house literally knowing I was there when you had water in your basement? And so, you know, I basically just told them, I said, you know, I think it's just a little bit too far for me. I'd love to give you a referral to someone else. But, you know, it's like, your sellers and buyers will lie to you. I had a buyer lie to me a couple weeks ago when he wasn't able to buy his house because he quit his job. And he's like, well, no, I'm still kind of employed there. I was like, nope, your company said that you gave your notice and you quit. He's like, well, I'm transitioning and this. And I was like, you quit your job. You quit your job. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And then he was like trying to get his job back and all this other stuff. So like people will lie to you. So you got to use like your own eyes, ears, and your, you know, your internal radar to tell you, like, does something seem wrong here?
Karla,
Yep.
So couldn't you have just said, listen, I was here when you had water. We have to disclose it.
I think it was one of those things, like, if you were going to so blatantly lie to my face about that, what else were you going to lie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that the reason you didn't take it? Because you just felt there was going to be other things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially when I specifically was like, the Mother's Day storm. And they were like, nope. It wasn't like, oh my God, we forgot about that. Or like, oh,
right.
We just got a trickle. Like, it was like flat out, nope. And I was like, okay, well, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that, and you don't want to put that between you and your friends that referred them.
Well, that as well. And it's so funny. I've helped those friends buy and sell so many times, and they just sold their house and they're moving to South Dakota. They're going off the grid. They're like, we can work from anywhere. We're moving to South Dakota. I was like, have fun. Let's see. Oh yeah, we're not going to go through stigmatized properties. Let's see. Yeah. You know, so stigmatized properties, you know, things that they're mentioning here, like HIV, felony, suicide, or homicide, parapsychosis, supernatural phenomenon, like, you know, these are sorts of things. But, you know, the question is, you can't stigmatize a property, but you also can't tell them that it's not if they ask. Like, that kind of goes back to the, like, you know, oh, look at that. There's another continuing education class that I could teach.
So if you know something happened, there was a murder, if somebody asks you, tell them, but you don't have to put that in MLS. Unless it was like a big news.
Well, if you know it, Kristen, like that goes back to like the ethics thing.
So would you have to disclose that in MLS to like everyone know, or would you, I just wait till, hey, Steve wants to show my property, I go, hey, by the way, this is the situation?
I think that as long as you were to tell the person, like maybe, right, maybe, and I don't know, this is honestly, like, I don't know. I'd have to read the MLS rules and everything else, like those sorts of things. I think that if like, but there comes the question. So, hang on one second. They're done? Guys, give me 1 second. My buyers are just finishing. I just wanna say congratulations. 1 second.
Congratulations.
Cheers. Wait, where's my glass? Cheers.
We'll connect soon.
Okay.
Bye.
There was no hugging, right?
Yeah, there was.
I mean, I think the problem with that question, Kristen, is I think it's a legitimate fact. I mean, what are you going to do when everyone walks in and be like, there's a ghost here, there's a ghost here? But if people are submitting offers, then like, is that when you tell them?
Right. Well, because if you're marketing it and have to say that, then you're going to get less people that are even going to look at it. Unless it was a triple murder that everybody wants to see it and everyone wants to buy it. That one in Weymouth, oh my God, they wrote on bold letters all over that listing, all over every document that was attached to it, that there was a triple murder there, and they had more showings than who knows. I mean, it was insane.
Well, like I know Dakota had one that there was a suicide in the property, and
Yep.
she called me up and she was like, you know what? She's like, I just feel better disclosing it so that there's no one's ever going to come back, or like the deal doesn't
Yep.
fall apart halfway through. So I think that that's actually, I mean, right. And then it's like, do you know something? You know, I mean, it is a question. I used to get it all the time. Has anyone ever died in this house? Especially when it's like, you can tell it's an old person's house, you know, that like, it's like, oh, well, did the owner but die in here? You know, like sort of thing.
Do you post that in the MLS, or do you, when someone makes an appointment, pull them aside and say, I just want to let you know that this house had a murder 30 years ago?
I'm gonna research that a little bit more, because the thing is that the rule is if you know you have to disclose, but it doesn't say where you have to disclose. So I guess that's when I need to go read the MLS rules again to say what are their rules for disclosure. So as long as you're letting someone know prior to, like, you know, submitting the offer or something,
Yeah.
I would say that that would be disclosure enough, but I could be wrong on that. I promise you.
What about?
I'm pretty sure you have to know, you have to disclose if you're asked, and that's
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
yes. If you're asked 100%.
oh, absolutely. I mean, I tell my buyers, if there are things that are important to you, I'll ask any question, you know, that is important to you. I'll ask and get the answer, because there's an obligation for this listing agent to answer truthfully, you know. But I don't think there's any obligation.
No.
Obviously, there's an ethical, you know, I like to sleep at night kind of feeling too. You know, if there's a certain situation in a house like suicide or murder or something like that.
Well, and Gerard, you can help me out here because I know your background. But the question becomes, at what point is it a material fact? And the material fact for any of you, you know, like the loosey-goosey definition is like,
cause someone else, an average person, to change their mind based on that information.
Would
you know,
act differently if you knew that piece of information? And what is the?
But that's so subjective.
Exactly. That's
right.
And so it's like, do you have to disclose if you're not asked? Like, so it's actually a really good question. I will do some research on it. If nothing else, I'll see if I can get a hold of Bill Mullen over at G-Bar, and like, if I really can never find like the definitive answer. And honestly, believe it or not, there's sometimes just gray areas in real estate that, you know, I will like sit there for an hour with Bill and be like, but what about this? And what about this? And, you know, I don't really have an answer.
Can I just?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Ronnie. Can I just say something? Because it was my understanding I recently retook the ethics course because I wanted to, that was one of the things, because, and in Massachusetts, because our property is so old, that you disclose if you're asked, but you ask the buyer, like he said, if there are any things that are important to you, I will ask. But I don't think we're obligated to disclose that information. I thought it was just if.
But
we were
how is that
directly
any
asked,
different
we had
than
to
if
be-
you know you have like black mold, or you know you have asbestos, or you know that you have, like, because technically it's
But
only,
that's, yeah, but I thought that was different from stigmatized properties. You know, Lucy Borden killed her parents, okay? But that didn't have to be disclosed to anyone that bought the property. It might be a selling point in one way, but because in Massachusetts, it's not a requirement unless someone actually asks. That was my understanding.
I gotta take that ethics class because I'm also a realtor on the 15th at 2 o'clock. So I will circle back with all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Karla,
because I get, yeah, I mean, the same thing to everyone's saying. I mean, like, if you know, like, somebody died, like, you know, like, as an agent, like, you know, you saw the person die in that house, like, you know, 100%, okay? You know, there's well, I'll absolutely tell you if you ask me. I'm not going to put it on
Right.
MLS, but
Right.
or should I just tell everybody verbally when, like, oh, you want to see the house? Okay, so just so you know, this is what happened.
By the way, there's a chalk outline on the floor. No.
No. I'm saying if like somebody, like an old person, like, you know, they wanted to pass away with their family. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you have to disclose? I mean, like, you know,
I think you do not have to. I agree with you guys. And especially in MLS, I don't think that you would ever put it in MLS. And I agree to Ronnie's point that like radon and, you know, black mold are hazards, and someone dying in the house is not a hazard. Although we could argue that, like, you know, paranormal activity could actually be a physical hazard.
Right,
But anyway,
right.
I would agree with you guys. I definitely don't think that you need to put it in MLS. The question is if they walk into the open house, do you have to tell them, or is it just a you asked and I told? I've kind of been all under the impression that you have to ask. But the thing is, the reason that it always gets a little gray area for me is that real estate agents and realtors are held to different standards. And that's sometimes where, when you read the ethics portion of it, it's like, well, and that goes back to the material fact. But if we're going to like if we're going to have a bright line rule right now, I would say you do not have to disclose unless asked, and you do not have to put it in MLS. If you're asking me right now to make that call, that's the call that I'm making.
That's what, Karla, that happened to me at an open house like a year ago. Like the agent, as soon as we walked in, they said the person died in the basement. And everybody was like, oh my gosh. Like as soon as you walked in, they told us. And it was just like, everybody was just like shocked, but they were just like making sure that everyone knew.
Yeah, and
that
some
they happened.
like, I'm not going to take the chance that I'm going to be made the example of that I didn't tell. And that's why, you know, like I said, like it is your business. It's like, where's your level of risk? Because if you're asked, you 100%, you have to say it. And then the question is, do you feel that, you know, and then here's the other thing. Your seller might be like, someone died in the basement. You are not allowed to disclose that information. Then what do? Do you take the listing? Because you have to tell them, no, now that I know, if I'm asked, I have to say it, because I know quite a few agents who have had these like ethical dilemmas where it's like, you can market my property to anyone, but I am not renting to a kid, or you can do whatever, but I'm not selling to this, you know, type of person or something. And it's like, well, you already know this. So, you know, and you can say, well, I still have to show it to everyone, or I still, you know, but it's like, at what point do you become implicated in the process? And, you know, so again, everybody has a different threshold for their risk, or, you know, anything else like that. So I think that that's what you need to do.
Karla, can I
and
ask you a
remember, the
quick
neighbor
question?
already knows, so the neighbor's going to tell them the day they move in.
Right.
You're going to run right over. Did you know somebody died?
What, Lisa?
The paranormal, that's only like hearsay. I think, isn't that we don't have to say, well, they think there's ghosts in there, because that's one of the ones that it's like, you don't have to say anything if people heard there was ghosts or something like that. Because I is that true that if you've heard, like, oh, you know what I mean? Because that's not something that's tangible.
Yeah.
Paranormal
you saw
activity.
it?
I'm trying to get this out of the way so I can, let's see. Section 114, the factor suspicious that real property may be psychologically impacted but not be deemed to be a material fact required to be disclosed in a real estate transaction. Psychologically impacted shall mean an impact being the result of factors suspicious or suspicions, including but not limited to. Has been suspected. Like, so these are the things that, like, you know, suicide, but these other things like suspected, alleged, those are words that it's up for interpretation. So yeah, you probably wouldn't have to disclose anything about suspected HIV or suspected, what about suspected COVID? I mean, right now, this is, this is a little bit old. But it shall not authorize a seller or real estate broker to make a misrepresentation of fact or false statement. So what it's saying is it doesn't have to be disclosed, but you can't keep it, sort of thing. So the fact that to Kristen's point, if the neighbor already knows, or it's kind of public knowledge and it was like on the news or something, like what good are you doing potentially not disclosing? But again, that's a personal call. Okay, there's a couple things that I want to talk about in my notes. Okay, in-laws.
Oh, good. I want to talk about that.
Okay, I understand that we're probably going to go over by maybe like 10 minutes or so. If people have to drop off, I totally understand. I want to respect your time, so I will not be offended. But if you want to keep on with this good stuff, Kristen, talk to me about in-laws.
All right. So, single family home in public record, town identifies it is. In the basement, there's a kitchen and a bathroom. Okay. Not going to market it as an in-law because it's not. Yep. But it does have a full kitchen down there. And it's not an in-law, a legal in-law. But it has a kitchen in there. Is that assuming that it's an in-law because it's got that? Do I still have to pull the stove out? Depends
on the town. So if some towns will not allow stoves in the kitchen, and they also, I've had them that they've made them rip out the kitchen cabinets too. It's really going to depend on the town. And no, I wouldn't necessarily say it's an in-law, because especially some of the towns around me and, stuff like that, it's like everybody had if you were, Italian, Portuguese,
Portuguese, they always have two kitchens.
They always have two kitchens. It's not an in-law. It's just, we needed a second kitchen, or it was really hot in the summer. So we put a second kitchen in the basement so it's cooler.
Yeah. Or their kid lives down there.
Or that.
If you just, no, but if that's the case, you have an adult child that lives down there and you put a little kitchen in there.
Yeah.
If it's not marketed as an in-law and it's just like, hey, it's just space down there.
Yeah.
Is that okay to just sell it that way as a single family with?
It's just a single family with a finished basement. The question becomes, is the fire department going to make you rip it out? So I think that's when you anonymously call the town and just go, or call the fire department and ask some questions. Because honestly, every town is different. Mm-hmm. It really is. So if you think you have an in-law, you want to call the town and go, hey, does this town allow in-laws? Because some towns do, and they'll certify it as an in-law, and some towns do not. Ronnie, you had a question?
The other thing that they might want to check with their mortgage company, because sometimes I have a house with two kitchens, okay? But the thing was with the mortgage company that they specifically stated in the mortgage papers that downstairs in-law space could not be rented or used for another, outside family. So that's another thing that you might want to look into.
Well, and I think that's, again, kind of like to what Gerard said, it's like, you got to go back and ask what your buyer's intentions are. So many times I don't really necessarily care so much about condo docs. What I care about are the rules and regulations. Do you have a prohibition? Do you have a truck that is it's a work truck that you're not going to be able to park at the condominium association? Do you have a dog, or do you plan on getting a dog? Do you plan on renting this at some point in the future? And is there a prohibition on rentals, or is there a rental list that you have to get on? Is there a smoking prohibition? Master deed and declaration of trust, for the most part, they're going to pretty much, with the exception of maybe parking spaces or a couple what's your percentage ownership? That's what I care about. For the master deed and declaration of trust, what I really care about are the rules and regulations. And that's what I can usually not get online. That's what the association has to give me if it's a bigger association. So it's kind of the same way. How does your client plan on using this property? And not for nothing, if it's an illegal 3-family and they're like, I don't care, I'm still gonna rent it as a 3-family, well, then that's what they want to do with it. But you've told them it's only a legal 2-family. Trust me, I've seen all sorts of crazy things.
Good point.
Karla, I have a quick question. I know we're going over time. Quick. When people write in the listing buyer and buyer's agent to do due diligence and confirm all this information, does that protect us at all when I say us, the listing agent, or is that just you're still not protected? Does that do anything?
I mean, I think it does in the sense that, I mean, first of all, it's implied, but now you're writing it down. It's still not going to protect you if certain questions are asked or, you know, those sorts of things. But I still don't think that it's going to protect you. Remember those cases that I showed you where you said it was a 3-family, but it was only a 2-family, but you truly thought, versus you didn't really know, but you represented it as one way. I don't think that buyer's agent to do all due diligence will protect you.
So that doesn't mean anything really.
That's
Well, so it's more of
terrible.
it's something that you really didn't know, and then they come back and go,
Right.
"Oh, Lisa, you knew that." No, I didn't.
No, I didn't. And I had no reason to think otherwise. Like that was the case where with the septic system, you know, it's like, I had no reason to think it wasn't on town septic. My listing agent had no reason to think it was on town septic. And this little old lady genuinely thought that it was on town septic. So we didn't actually misrepresent or anything. It wasn't even like, I don't know, my husband always took care of those things. She was like, no, I'm on town septic. Like there was no question about it when I did my intake. Like it was like, are you on town water and sewer? MLS says town water and sewer. Yes, I'm on town water and sewer. Great, fantastic, next question. So I had no way to know or reason to think. And again, it's not like it was out in the boondocks somewhere or down in marshland somewhere that I'm like, really? You're on, I didn't even know that they had town sewer in this town. Like there was no level to raise it to me think that I should actually not do additional due diligence.
Okay.
But I think like so in the first case scenario with that case study, if you put it was 3-family and you had no reason to think it wasn't a 3-family, and they came back and said, you sold me something that was a 2-family and you misrepresented, you could be like, I had no reason to know. You needed to do your due diligence. The second case scenario was they put it that it was a mixed use property, that it was commercial and residential and everything else like that. And the seller didn't really know. And the listing agent didn't do any further due diligence and just put it out that way. And that's why they got sued and they lost, because the court said you had a reason to think that you didn't know and you didn't do any more due diligence.
Okay.
So I'd say that there's some level of protection, but again, all of that language is then somehow needs to be somewhat incorporated, which good purchase and sale agreements, the reason that we have addendums and riders and everything else like that, should be fleshing all of that out as well. That's like, I put a lot of things in my buyer's addendum that they might come back and say, I don't agree with that. And I'm like, okay, well, the reason it was in there was to prompt a conversation. Why are you crossing out that there's never been felony or substantial damage to the house? Why are you crossing out that it's flood zone? Why are you crossing out permit things? Are you just across due course saying buyer needed to do all their due diligence? Or are you saying you know something and that's why you're actually deleting it? So it's just a conversation starter. Okay, hang on one second. Let's see what else we got in here. We're not going to go into the P&S language. No. Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. So the clause may not survive in close, but it could, because again, look back to the case studies that we started with. So a couple quick things that I want to say, you know, if you don't know, you don't know. So a perfect example of what I would say, Union Square, since I was selling real estate back in 2001, has had a green line coming. The Union Square is like in Somerville, like the Somerville area. Green line's still not there. Now I was selling people hot and heavy because everyone's like, the green line's coming. Let's pick up this property really fast because the rates in the market, the rents are going to skyrocket. We still don't have it. So it's like, do you know for sure, or is it conjecture? Have you called the town? Like, you know, all these sorts of things, you know, there's plans for a charter school. You're living in a safe area. Is it rumor and conjecture, or is it quantifiable fact? If I'm going to sell someone, we're in one of the best school systems. When I say that, I'm going to have the Boston Magazine, like best schools, and I'm going to like source my data and say, because the Boston Magazine says this is one of the top 3 school systems, that's where I'm getting that data from. Because again, a good school is, you know, what are you basing it on? You know, make sure you're doing due diligence. Like if you're going to, like, conventional lending will not allow loans on some place that has more than 20% of commercial space. You know, so if you have the first floor is all like a pizza shop, a dry cleaner, and a nail place, and then you have 2 apartments upstairs, it may end up being a problem. You might not get conventional lending. You know, you need to find out ahead of time if we think that Title V may fail. Not every lender will allow us to do a holdback. Some lenders will not let us close until that's done. So again, we need to be asking these questions of our lenders ahead of time. Let's see. We have, you know, so this is an interesting case. The first house I ever listed in Belmont, first house I ever listed, period, in Belmont. And we're on a main road that goes right to Route 2. And someone said, hey, can this house be hooked up to gas? Because everything was on electric. And I was like, well, there's gas on the street. I don't see why not. Let me check. And I called the gas department and they said, oh, there's gas on the street. It stops 2 houses down. And if you want to connect, you have to pay for the entire pipeline down the street to your house and connect you to the house.
They do that.
So like, you know, it was one of those things that I could have been like, yeah, no problem. I could have potentially gotten myself into trouble. So, you know, are there any sewer or, you know, sewer veterans? Is the town going to be hooking up to sewer? Does the seller, if they're on septic, it's not a bad idea to call the town and find out, do we have to connect to the septic system before we sell? So if you've been grandfathered in because you've been an owner and you're now selling, the town, if it's gone to sewer, may require you upon sale to tie in. And that, you know, that could be, it could take time and everything else like that. Same with, you know, planned assessments for the condominium association, making sure your buyer can call their own insurance agent and say, is this in a flood zone? So even if the seller doesn't have to pay it, if the seller doesn't have a mortgage or anything on the property, they might not be required to carry flood insurance. So they can honestly say, I'm not required to carry flood insurance, but that doesn't mean it's not, flood insurance isn't required. Good things to know, are the sellers going through a divorce? That puts a huge hiccup. I believe that if your sellers do not already have a separation agreement stating like what's happening to the house, what's happening to the kids and everything else like that, I think it's a bad idea to almost list the house, especially with how fast things are moving. I'll tell you my very sad story about that. We had neither one of the sellers were being represented. And I was representing the wife in her portion of the sale, and then she was purchasing. And the husband wouldn't sign the deed ahead of time, wouldn't sign it, said, I'm coming to closing, I'm going to sign it. And I kept saying, like, guys, you know, we're at the closing table for the sale. Now he was abusive and she really needed like out of this situation. And he sat there and I was like, okay, well, you need to sign this, everything. He looked across the table at her and said, I get the kids every holiday if you want me to sign this deed. And she just burst out crying. And she was like, you can't do that to me. He's like, you want out? You have to agree to that. Now, granted, did they probably eventually go to court and say it was under duress and like everything else like that? But it's like, same with like, you know, I had one, I actually stepped away and it was a agent in this office where it's like, there's potential litigation coming up. And it was all like, well, what are we going to do with the seller's proceeds? And they were like, well, we don't want to give them out and someone needs to hold them. And I was like, are the parties agreeing to this? And it was getting very messy. And I could see myself getting sued because one party wants me to do one thing and the other party wants me to do the other, and they didn't have any attorneys involved. And I was like, no, I'm not putting myself in the middle of this. You guys need to decide now. I had another one the other day that the divorce attorney called us up screaming because the husband owned an investment property and wife wasn't on the deed. And he was like, oh yeah, it's a great time to sell, let's sell. And so it was already at the form of purchase and sale agreement. And the divorce attorney was like, are you trying to hide funds from my client? I was like, what are you talking about? He didn't tell us he was getting divorced. He was trying to divest himself of the property to get the money out before the divorce could get a hold of it. Like, you know, so there's all sorts of crazy things going on. And then the same, like, is the seller in the middle of a bankruptcy because sometimes they can't sell until a certain portion of the bankruptcy has been paid back or something like that. I think that's all. I don't want to take up any more of your time. If you have any questions, I'm more than willing to stay here and answer them. I'm more than willing to have a call or emails with people otherwise. Yes, Kristen.
As is. So
thank you so much.
So client just says to me, listen, as is, I don't want to do anything, like, it is what it is, like, not that they're saying that, oh, all this stuff's wrong, right? It's just like, I don't want to fix whatever, like, just, I'm not going to paint that, I'm not going to, whatever. I mean, if you just put, hey, as is, like, in other words, like, you can do a home inspection, do whatever you want, but like, we're not fixing anything just because seller doesn't have the money, they don't have the bandwidth, whatever. I mean,
I have an answer, but Ronnie, say what you're going to say, and then I'm going to cover all of this.
No, I'm just going to say thank you very much. I have to go though.
It was very nice seeing you,
But
Ronnie. Thank you.
This was an excellent class and it really did give me some insights into things that I need to know. I will be in touch.
Awesome.
Bye.
Have a great one.
Bye-bye.
bye.
So I think the question of as is and the confusion around it is exactly what you're coming to, Kristen, is like some people put it as is because they're like, listen, my people are old, or my people have already moved away, or it's an estate sale and the kids live all over the United States and we're not going to be like tightening toilets and changing GFIC outlets and everything. And sometimes it just means as is, take it, leave it, we don't care. And then sometimes it can mean something else. So the problem is with saying as is, and not that it's a problem, is that it's up for interpretation.
Yes.
And that's really what it is. So I'm a huge believer anytime that I was ready to write an offer. And again, this might not work in today's market because the listing agent might be like, put in your offer, I'll deal with you if I get to you.
Yeah.
But hopefully that we have a little bit more camaraderie and we're still human to each other. When I was ready to submit an offer, I'd call the agent. Okay, what do I need to know? Is there a preferred closing date? Are there preferred dates in there? Like, what's going to make my offer attractive to you other than price? Yeah. Oh, and we can waive all of our contingencies right now. But like, what's going to make it like, what, is it gonna, is the sob letter going to do more? Is the this, is the that? So it's like, I would call up and be like, hey, I see it's as is. That's great. Can you define what that is for me? And then the other thing is too, that I know used to make listing agents so mad and used to make sellers so mad, is that you can put as is and the buyer's agent is going to be like, we don't care that it said as is. It's the same with home
informational purposes only.
And then they come back and they ask for repairs. And it's like, well, no harm, no foul. But at the same time, this is something that this is like a big thing for me, is that when buyers say for informational purposes only, if I were the listing agent, I'd go back and go, great, you can have the inspection once the purchase and sale is signed. Yeah. Because if it's truly for informational purposes only, you want this house and everything else like that, I don't want to take it off the market. I don't want to lose all the excitement that I have. I don't want to have to like go back and explain, because someone's going to go, why did they walk away? Oh, they had an inspection. They didn't like what they see. Well, why? What did they see? Like, no, in this market, there's no reason. You can have your inspection once we have your 5% or whatever amount you're putting down, period, end of story.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, in most markets, it'll work. In some markets, it won't. But yeah, you can have it after the PNS is signed. We can go right to PNS. We can be into PNS in 2 or 3 days, period, done.
But suppose it's truly like a health issue.
What do you mean?
Like suppose there's black mold.
As is.
You can always.
As is, mold and everything.
Took it.
After the fact though, I mean, buyer's agents are writing, oh, informational purposes only, because they think, well, then the seller will accept the offer. But a home inspection is always for informational purposes only.
Right. Okay.
It's just then you find things and then you want to renegotiate, but it's always for informational purposes.
What I like better, and I don't think it's on the MAR form, it's only on the GBAR form, is that, where it says like they're going to have an inspection, and if the aggregate amount is up to, like, I think that's a more powerful statement that says like 10,000, 15,000, because well, guess what? You have to have a foundation issue, a huge
water issue,
or like a roof issue. Other than that, nothing. You can rewire a 4,000 square foot house for like under $15,000. So, the listing agent is going to know that it's going to have to be massive.
Major.
So like $10,000 and above, I think is a more powerful statement than for informational purposes only. Because it means we're moving forward if we don't find something major. But again, I don't think the MAR form offers that. I think it's only the GBAR.
It doesn't.
But I prefer the MAR form because I like how it's set out better. But I always use the GBAR form.
I love the GBAR. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's like Coke and Pepsi. Like, which one do you use?
I like the GBAR for the buyer and the MAR form for the listing.
Well, we can always write that line in.
You could, yeah.
Yeah.
Even if the 10K language is not on the form you choose to use, you can still write it in.
Yeah, and buyers shall not renegotiate or walk away if inspection items are less than aggregate of $10,000. That's the thing. I mean, you guys can definitely get creative with the counter offers. I mean, you don't, if you're negotiating price or you're negotiating dates, you can negotiate these other terms as well. And I mean, I know that when the market was really hot and heavy in like 4, 5, and 6, I used to, like, if I didn't know the lender or it wasn't a local lender, I would tell people, I will accept your offer, but you have to go get pre-approved by this person. Because then I know that, okay, if Bob Malone says you're good to go, or Mike King says you're good to go, or Cheryl Smith says you're good to go, I know you're good to go. They have done the due diligence. They're good loan officers. They've, picked up every stone and looked in every corner. And that way, if Bank of America or some other crappy Rocket Mortgage can't get the job done, I can go back and be like, okay, you've already kind of vetted them. You already have a little bit of limited information. Can you put this at the top of your list? And can we, we might need an extension, but could you get this done in 20 days instead of 40 days or, something like that? Because again, when there's so much competition and everything, why not? You can make the terms whatever you want. And I didn't think it was, too much to ask if a buyer was that serious about it. My personal opinion, because, we've had times where, like someone was saying here, your pre-approval didn't say that, or maybe it was the call I was on before this, maybe. The pre-approval didn't state it was subject to you selling your house, but when you're denied a mortgage or your mortgage commitment says subject to you selling your house, and you're like, why wasn't this brought to my attention, 4 weeks ago when I accepted your offer? You didn't say that you had to sell your house or refinance. I can't tell you how many times I get offers. This is like a huge pet peeve of mine. The offer doesn't mention that the buyer has to sell their house, and then the seller calls me and I'm representing on their sale and their purchase, and I'm like, do you have to sell your house in order to purchase? They're like, yes. And then I call the agent, I'm like, why didn't you include this in here? Do you understand what you've done? And I get 1 of 2 answers almost every single time. Well, our offer wouldn't have been accepted if we put that in there. Or I figured that you could put that into the P&S afterwards. I'm like, no, that's a material fact that we negotiate for. It's the same with like when they say that they're going to do something funky with the mortgage, and then all of a sudden they want to like double their mortgage amount. And they're like, well, I was like, no, it went from you're buying a $400,000 house and getting a $150,000 mortgage. Now all of a sudden you're going to have a $300,000 mortgage. You can't do that. That's like, you can apply for any amount of mortgage you want, but if you're denied for anything over 150, they can make you go back and get your $150,000 loan. So there's just, I feel like that because we're moving so fast and furious and people are doing everything that they can, it's just, it's scary out there for buyers. It really is. It's really scary for buyers right now, especially first-time home buyers. So that's what I got for you kids. I'm not going to go into anything else. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed it. I always love teaching this one because I like being able to have some like horror stories to help root that information in your mind. But if you think of anything, I'm always here for a resource. And hopefully as the world opens up a little bit more, I'll be in my office across from Kristen more and more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Bye guys. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.